This video is suitable for IDP history students. Hope you find it useful. It's useful for paper 2 and possibly paper 3 as well for Germany, looking at the rise of Hitler and that kind of mid-year period of the Weimar Republic. There's a couple of videos and a website link there just to get you in the mood with the Munich Putsch. Remember that first violent attempt by Hitler and the Nazis to take power, emulate Mussolini's march on Rome with the march on Berlin that comes to nothing. And of course it's at that point that Hitler decides that violence and force is not the answer, and he's going to be elected legally as the leader of Germany. As you know, there's terrible troubles in Germany at this time. We've got the invasion of the Ruhr, you have the failure to pay the reparations. Remember, Germany pays one instalment, the sum is fixed in April 1921. Germany makes the payment in April 1922 and doesn't meet another payment after that. Into the chaos comes Gustav Stresemann. Remember, his solutions to the Ruhr crisis and hyperinflation actually caused his government to fall in November, but he remains foreign minister. And he's pretty popular internationally. He helps rehabilitate Germany, get them into the League of Nations, and of course the Locarno Treaty a year later in 1925. So we can talk about the Stresemann era, but do remember he was only Chancellor for the briefest of times in 1923. Introducing a new currency was one of the aspects that stabilised the insane hyperinflation that ended in November 1923, and this is a temporary currency, and it was replaced by the Reichsmark in 1924, which is backed by gold. Along with the economic recovery, the new currency, the French withdrawal from the war, the end of the Ruhr, the end of passive resistance. Also, the Dawes Plan comes into play. And this is the plan that really kind of gets Germany back on its international feet and back trading again. Up until this point, one of Germany's main trading partners had really been the other outcast of Europe, the Soviet Union. So the Dawes Plan was a system by which the United States lent Germany money. These were short-term 90-day loans that were just simply renewed every 90 days. And that's a very typical way for countries to loan each other money. So it wasn't an unusual decision at the time. Germany would then use that money to repay its reparations to Britain and France, and then Britain and France in turn would pay their war debts to the USA. So the key things to note about the Dawes Plan is that the USA is the only country that's putting money into the system, and at some point the German economy is going to have to find ways to repay that money back to the USA. So what we're counting on is German industry and German sort of manufacturing to be able to reproduce enough money to repay the reparations, pay the reparations and to repay those war debts. That was pretty realistic at the time. Germany traditionally had been the powerhouse of the European economy, no reason to doubt it, and there'd been a general economic recovery in Europe since the early 1920s as well, so it's a reasonable plan. Germany works hard for it, and the Weimar Republic has some pretty ambitious plans. A pretty ambitious welfare state is planned, but like I said earlier, there's a general economic recovery. Growth is erratic, and the government makes some fairly reasonable choices to try and keep the Weimar economy on an even keel. But the thing to remember is that everything is funded through the US loans, and that the Weimar Constitution had built in an ambitious welfare state program, which many people had high expectations of. So there's a number of pressures on the Weimar economy. As time goes on, though, as the 1920s go on, there's an increase in agricultural production, and that actually is echoed worldwide as well. And of course, that will cause one of the slumps in the prices of grain in particular, which will hit farmers hard. And there is actually increasing indebtedness and bankruptness in German farms through 1928, and it's farmers actually and kind of small yeoman farmers in Germany that will form some of the basis of that electoral support for the Nazis during this time period. The industrial production increases, you can see, but it's also these people here, the middle class, the Mittelstand, who are beginning to question what's going on, and these are the people that will have suffered the most during the hyperinflation and the financial crisis of 1923. So still questions are being asked, and remember that this is a flashy time in Germany. It's all sort of cabaret and jazz music, and so perhaps the sort of the people of the land, people of the countryside are beginning to question perhaps some of the sort of arty decadence that they might associate with the big cities in Germany at this time. Politics do become more stable. They couldn't have got any worse after 1923. If you think about the Spartacist uprising, the Bavarian Socialist Republic, if you remember the Cat Putsch and the right-wing political assassinations that were going on, Walter Rathenau is a good case study there. So political violence is ongoing, particularly from the Nazis through the SA, and the KPD, the German Communist Party, you know, weren't shy with their fists either. So there's still plenty of political violence and street fighting, but in general, the levels of kind of attempts to assassinate people is reduced. There is a little bit more constancy in government, but not a lot. You still have those coalition governments shaped by the nature of the proportional representation that the Weimar Constitution established, and the economic successes again perhaps moves people away from political extremism. So there's some encouraging signs, but some weaknesses and lack of foundation still there as well. You can easily track the fortunes of the Nazi Party against German unemployment figures, and during this 23 to 28 period, in general, the Nazi Party declined. Remember, Hitler's made that resolution that time in prison that he's going to get the Nazis elected legally, and he uses this time for party organisation. He organises the party on a national level into Gau with Gauleiters, and he also begins that fundamental training of Nazi speakers and party members so they can sort of target their ideas according to whether they're speaking to mums at the school gate, kids in the park, people in a beer hall, that kind of stuff. So it's a time of organisation for the Nazi Party. You've still got short-lived coalition governments, as I mentioned, and no government lasts for more than 2 years. And there really isn't enough commitment from many of the political parties to compromise in coalition. So this kind of idea of a devotion for Germany, for the Weimar Republic, that a political party would kind of compromise its ideals, doesn't really come through. And that will, of course, cause further and further challenges as we go right through to the end of 1932. You can see here the Nazi election results. These go up to July 1932. If you had a look at the results for November 1932, you would see a tiny little decrease there. Hitler took that very badly, and this is pointed out in the Nazis a Warning from History video, that, you know, he actually even contemplated suicide at this time. Possibly the reason for that slight slump in decrease is the kind of the continuing expense of running elections. But really, actually, some historians also suggest that this was a time when some of the Weimar government's economic policies and recovery programs were beginning to kick in. Remember, by this time, the Great Depression has been going on for about 2.5 years. So after the Wall Street crash, of course, America wants to recall those loans. They're 90-day loans. There's no money coming in from anywhere else. Britain and France have got their own concerns. Stalin's Russia, of course, is in a desperate state at this time. And of course, that famous quote from Stresemann, that this really is it, that the Weimar recovery, these golden years between 1924 and 1929 were really built on these short-term credits. And it's that Great Depression, of course, which will cause the economic trauma, which will lay the foundation for the collapse of the Weimar Republic. Perhaps the amazing thing to think about is the fact that it survived the crises of 1923 to from 1919 to 1923, and by 1929. There are positive signs, but everything is built on American loans. Hope that helps. Thanks for watching.